Ever wondered what actually happens in those final moments when your heart stops beating and your brain shuts down? Well, buckle up, because what I'm about to share with you might completely shatter everything you thought you knew about death. You know how most people think death is just the end, lights out, game over, nothing? Yeah, that's not even close to what one of the most mysterious and profound texts in human history reveals. We are talking about a book so powerful, so detailed in its description of the afterlife, that it's been hidden away in Tibetan monasteries for over 1,000 years. And here's the crazy part: this isn't some fairy tale or wishful thinking. This is a step-by-step manual written by someone who claimed to have actually experienced what happens after death and returned to tell us about it. If you've ever lost someone close to you, if you've ever laid awake at night wondering what really happens when we die, then you need to hear this. But before we dive into these mind-blowing revelations, hit that like button and subscribe, because what we're exploring today could change how you see life, death, and everything in between. So what is this mysterious text? It's called the Bardo Thodol, but you might know it by its Western name, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And no, this isn't your typical religious text filled with vague promises and abstract concepts. This is literally a GPS for the afterlife, a detailed roadmap of exactly what your consciousness experiences from the moment you take your last breath until you figure out what comes next. Think about it this way: when you're planning a trip to a foreign country, you don't just show up and hope for the best, right? You study maps, learn about the culture, maybe even learn some basic phrases. Well, according to this ancient text, death is the ultimate foreign territory, and most of us are showing up completely unprepared. But here's where it gets interesting. The person who wrote this guidebook wasn't some armchair philosopher theorizing about death from a safe distance. This was Padmasambhava, a figure so legendary that even today, over 12 centuries later, people debate whether he was actually human or something more. Picture this. It's the 8th century, and Tibet is a wild, untamed land dominated by shamanic practices and spirit worship. The king desperately wants to bring Buddhism to his people, but there's one massive problem: the local spirits and deities are not having it. They're actively fighting against any attempt to establish Buddhist teachings. So what does the king do? He calls in Padmasambhava, this mysterious master from India who's rumored to possess abilities that would make your favorite superhero look like an amateur. And here's where the story gets absolutely wild. Instead of trying to destroy these opposing forces, Padmasambhava does something unprecedented. He negotiates with them. We're talking about a man who could allegedly bend reality itself, communicating with invisible entities and turning hostile spirits into protective guardians. He didn't just bring Buddhism to Tibet, he revolutionized it, creating a unique fusion that honored the existing spiritual landscape while introducing profound new insights about consciousness and death. Now you might be thinking, okay, but why should I care about some ancient Tibetan text? Here's why: because what Padmasambhava discovered about the dying process is so detailed, so specific, that it reads less like ancient mythology and more like a modern neuroscientist's report on consciousness. He identified 3 distinct phases that every single person goes through when they die. Not might go through, will go through. And understanding these phases, according to him, is the difference between being lost in confusion and terror versus experiencing the most profound liberation possible. Let me paint you a picture of what supposedly happens in those first crucial moments after death. You know how sometimes when you're falling asleep, you have that sensation of falling and you jolt awake? Well, imagine something similar, but instead of waking up in your bed, you're waking up into a reality where the normal rules no longer apply. This first phase is called the Chikai Bardo, and it's happening right now as your physical body is shutting down. Your heart has stopped, your brain activity is fading, but here's the thing: according to this text, your consciousness isn't disappearing. It's just being freed from its physical container, and then something extraordinary happens. You encounter what the text calls the clear light, not the cheesy tunnel of light you see in movies, but something far more profound. This light isn't coming from somewhere else, it is you. It's the pure, unfiltered essence of your consciousness, stripped of all the mental chatter, all the fears, all the identities you've carried your whole life. Here's where it gets really interesting though. Most people, when they encounter this clear light, absolutely panic. Why? Because for the first time in their existence, they're experiencing themselves without any reference points. No body, no thoughts, no familiar surroundings, just pure awareness. And for a mind that's spent decades identifying with thoughts and physical sensations, this is terrifying. Imagine suddenly losing all your senses while remaining completely conscious. No sight, no sound, no touch, just awareness itself. Most people immediately retreat from this experience, and that's when they move into the second phase, which is where things get really weird. Welcome to the Choniad Bardo, or as I like to call it, the ultimate psychological horror show. Because now your consciousness, having rejected the pure peace of the clear light, starts projecting every repressed fear, every unfulfilled desire, every shadow aspect of your personality into vivid, seemingly real experiences. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, hit the nail on the head when he said that gods and demons are just projections of our unconscious mind. Well, in this bardo, those projections become your entire reality. And we're not talking about subtle influences here. We're talking about full-blown, movie-quality hallucinations that feel more real than anything you've ever experienced while alive. The text describes two types of visions you'll encounter, and trust me, neither one is easy to handle. First come the peaceful visions, beautiful, serene beings of light, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas radiating perfect love and wisdom. Sounds nice, right? Wrong. For most people, these beings are so overwhelmingly pure, so intensely radiant, that they trigger massive feelings of unworthiness and fear. Think about it, you've just died, you're confused and disoriented, and suddenly you're face to face with beings that embody everything you've never been able to achieve. The natural response, you run, you turn away from these visions because they highlight every failure, every moment of selfishness, every time you fell short of your own ideals. And that's when the wrathful visions show up. Oh boy, this is where things get really intense. We're talking about monstrous, terrifying beings with multiple heads, fangs dripping blood, eyes blazing with fury. These aren't random monsters, they're personifications of your own anger, hatred, jealousy, and fear, manifested in the most horrifying forms imaginable. But here's the plot twist that changes everything. None of these visions, peaceful or wrathful, are actually external entities. They're all you. Every terrifying demon, every radiant Buddha, every disturbing scene you witness is your own mind showing you aspects of yourself that you've either suppressed or idealized. And this is where the Bardo Thodol becomes absolutely brilliant as a psychological tool. It's essentially saying that death forces you to confront every single aspect of your psyche without any of the usual distractions. No Netflix to binge, no social media to scroll, no work to hide behind, just you and the unfiltered contents of your own consciousness. The key to navigating this phase successfully. Recognizing that everything you're experiencing is empty of inherent existence. It's all mental projections, no more real than the thoughts that pop into your head while you're alive. But try explaining that to someone who's experiencing what feels like the most vivid, intense reality they've ever encountered. This is why the text emphasizes training during life. It's like learning to swim before you're thrown into the ocean. If you've never practiced recognizing thoughts as just thoughts, if you've never learned to observe your mind without being caught up in its dramas, then facing these intense visions is going to be overwhelming. But for those who can maintain awareness, who can remember that these visions are just projections of their own mind, something incredible happens. They can achieve liberation right there in that moment, transcending the entire cycle of death and rebirth that keeps most souls trapped for lifetime after lifetime. And speaking of rebirth, that brings us to the third and final phase, the Sidpa Bardo. This is where things get really personal, because this is where your accumulated karma, all the energy of your thoughts and actions throughout your life, determines what happens next. Imagine your consciousness is like a river that's been flowing in a particular direction for decades. All your habits, your emotional patterns, your deepest desires and fears, they've carved a specific channel in your psyche. Now, in this final bardo, that river is looking for a new place to flow. The text describes this phase as being like a psychic storm, where consciousness feels an almost irresistible urge to reconnect with physical existence. But here's what's fascinating: the type of rebirth you're drawn toward isn't random. It's precisely calibrated to match your inner state. If you've lived a life dominated by fear, you'll be magnetically drawn towards circumstances that will force you to confront and ultimately transcend that fear. If you've been driven by intense desires that you never learned to master, your next life will be structured around learning that mastery. This isn't punishment, it's education. Each rebirth is perfectly designed to give you exactly the experiences you need for spiritual growth. But here's the catch: most people don't realize this is what's happening. They think they're just randomly ending up in new bodies, new families, new circumstances. The Bardo Thodol describes how consciousness in this phase encounters visions of couples in union, representing potential new births. And here's where it gets really specific. Your emotional reaction to these visions determines where you end up. If you feel attraction, you might be drawn into a human birth. If you feel aversion, you might end up in more difficult circumstances. But for those who can maintain awareness even in this phase, there's still one final opportunity for complete liberation. Instead of being pulled into another cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death, they can choose to merge with the clear light permanently, ending the cycle altogether. Think about what this means. It's suggesting that enlightenment isn't just available to monks who spend decades meditating in caves. It's potentially available to anyone, even after death, if they can just recognize the true nature of what they're experiencing. Now you might be wondering, is any of this actually real, or is it just an ancient version of science fiction? Here's what's interesting: modern neuroscience is discovering things about consciousness and death that echo many of these ancient teachings. We now know that consciousness doesn't simply shut off when the brain stops functioning. There's a complex process of neural activity that continues for minutes, sometimes even hours after clinical death. People who have had near-death experiences often report encounters that are remarkably similar to what the Bardo Thodol describes. But even if you're skeptical about what literally happens after death, there's profound wisdom in these teachings that applies to how we live. Because in many ways, we're going through mini versions of these bardos every single day. Every time you fall asleep, your consciousness disengages from sensory input and enters a state similar to the clear light. Every time you dream, you're creating vivid, seemingly real experiences from the projections of your own mind. Every time you wake up, you're essentially choosing to rebirth yourself into physical existence. The Bardo Thodol is teaching us that the same awareness that can navigate death successfully can also navigate life more skillfully. If you can learn to recognize your thoughts as just thoughts, if you can observe your emotions without being controlled by them, if you can see through the illusions that create suffering, then you're already practicing the skills needed for whatever comes after death. And here's something that might blow your mind. The text suggests that how you face death is largely determined by how you live. If you spend your life running away from difficult emotions, avoiding challenging situations, numbing yourself with distractions, then when death strips away all those escape routes, you're going to be in serious trouble. But if you use your life as training ground for awareness, if you practice facing difficulties with courage and clarity, if you learn to find peace in the midst of chaos, then death becomes not an ending, but a graduation ceremony. This is why Padmasambhava created this text, not to scare people about death, but to empower them to live more consciously. He understood that most people are sleepwalking through life, completely unprepared for the most universal human experience. So what does this mean for you right now in your current life? It means that every challenging situation you face is practice for the ultimate challenge. Every time you choose love over fear, awareness over reactivity, peace over drama, you're literally training for death. And here's the beautiful paradox: the more you prepare for death, the more fully you can live. When you truly understand that everything you're clinging to is temporary, when you recognize that your essential nature is something much deeper than your thoughts and emotions, you become free to experience life with incredible richness and depth. The Bardo Thodol isn't just telling us what happens when we die, it's revealing what we really are while we're alive. It's showing us that beneath all our fears, all our identities, all our stories about ourselves, there's something luminous and unbreakable that death cannot touch. As Ram Dass beautifully put it, when you die, there is only one question that matters: how much did you love? But I'd add to that, how awake were you? How present were you with your own experience? How much did you practice seeing through the illusions that create suffering? Because according to this ancient wisdom, death isn't the opposite of life, it's life's greatest teacher. It's the experience that shows us what we really are when everything else falls away. And the more we can learn to die while we're still alive, to let go of our attachments, to release our need to control, to surrender our small sense of self to something vastly larger, the more we can discover the incredible freedom that's available right here, right now. This journey through the Bardos isn't something that happens to us, it's something we're participating in every moment. Every breath is a small death and rebirth. Every thought that arises and passes away is showing us the impermanent nature of all experience. Every moment of awareness is a glimpse of the clear light that the Bardo Thodol says is our true nature. So the real question isn't what happens when we die. It's what are we going to do with this incredible opportunity we have right now to wake up, to love more deeply, to live more consciously, and to prepare for the greatest adventure any of us will ever take. The ancient Tibetan masters understood something profound: that death is not the enemy of life, but its greatest ally. It's what gives life urgency, meaning, and preciousness. And by understanding what awaits us in those final moments, we can transform not just how we die, but how we live.